Social permaculture is about culture. It's about how we relate to each other. It's about how our behaviors and actions are actually manifest in the world.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Guy.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me on. I want to acknowledge the elders of the country I'm calling from. So I'm on one Jerry Burris country in the Yagambeh language group up here in Mount Tambourine on the Gold Coast hinterlands. Yeah, nourished by and soothed by the lands and waters up here. It's very, very beautiful. I'm very lucky. Permaculture. Like many people, I think permaculture is just fantastic. The way that the design system is used is so flexible and so tangible to apply accurate design towards what we need moving forward. Really, the limitations, and as a principle, is the limitation is the imagination of the designer. That's looking forward, but also the limitations are, what are the limitations of the individual and what is the limitations of the society? And so where we sit in, I run Permaqueer with my partner, which is permaculture focused on access to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, asexual, LGBTQIA+, and BIPOC communities. So communities that sit on the fringe, on the edge of society, and how do we fold their perspectives into what the permaculture vision is? And the reason why we are interested in being in that space, aside from because we know the edge is where it's at, but that is who we are. That's who my community is. That's where I come from. And in the society that we have, a lot of the systems that we've established don't necessarily cater to our ways of being, our ways of knowing, our ways of relating. And thus, the spaces that our community sits in is typically the cracks and the edges of the system. And what we've realized is that getting feedback and designing from the cracks closes those cracks. It makes that system more resilient and makes the society as a whole more resilient. We know in permaculture that we do have to have a vast diversity of organisms interacting and exchanging nutrients and fluids and all of that to make this beautiful ecosystem work. And that's the same in social spheres. A lot of the ways that we are conditioned in our society actually conditions us to have certain beliefs and understandings about how society should work and how it could work. And when we have these beliefs, it kind of focuses the lens on what we can achieve based on what's achievable within these lenses. And in sort of, queer LGBT spaces, we call these binaries. So it's one or the other. It's hot or cold. It's rich or poor. When in reality, there's a whole spectrum of how things exist. It's not just top canopy and ground cover. There's all of the things in between and all of the animals that interact with it. And these things actually grow to this state, and then time passes and they fall back down. And it's actually cycled back through the whole system at any given point. So a lot of assumptions that we make and our society is sort of predicated on come from a lot of these binaries. And as we know in monocultures, you don't necessarily have a lot of cross-pollination and growth and diversity and also resilience. You aren't able to continue that syntropic growth where we continue to gain abundance, we continue to gain complexity if we sit within these sort of monocultures of thought is what we call them. So we have a couple ways to approach the monocultures that we see, and specifically we've targeted the ones that we believe are the most unhelpful in the society that we exist within. There are many of them, and if we sit back for a second, I'm sure everyone can come up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different binaries, but a few that I'll sort of share with us are the ones that we sort of revolve around quite a lot. Firstly, and and probably most obvious is the binary of gender, which is that's about the individual unit. That's about our zone 00. That's about how we relate to ourselves. And it's about how we relate to others. And a huge assumption that we're conditioned to in a lot of different ways, and this has a huge, complex, and very fascinating history of how it's come to this space, of what gender is and of how we should act and of what we should do. And we know this horrific history of gendered roles and rights to women. And there's also horrific implications of toxic patriarchy. And all of these things we see as a manifestation of this binary. So all of the horrible roles and ideals of how women should be or how men should be, when in reality, we're all just people. There are inherent qualities that we have that may lend us to be here or there. But actually holding on to these ideas of how we should behave, of what masculinity looks like, of what femininity looks like, specifically toxic masculinity, which is this is rampant in government spaces, actually. I'm sure everyone knows that in Australia. But we do need to shed a lot more light on this gender issue, because all of a sudden we're having this culture of destruction and extraction, which is very, very aligned to this idea that we have of what it is to be masculine. And being permaculturalists, we understand it's about the system. It's not about the individual. It's about how we flow these things through. At the core of this, we need to start inspecting what are the ways and cultures that we're relating on a systemic level that are producing these symptoms of relating. And so the gender binary for us, it takes education initially to understand, what are these queers talking about? They're wearing makeup and earrings and women's dresses, and that's a bit ridiculous. I'm not sure. And really where we see from this gender expression is we know that a lot of the systems we have aren't working. We know how damaging they are. We see women marching for men to take accountability and responsibility of themselves. And we're seeing a younger generation not wanting to identify with any of that. And actually within that space, they're discovering a third, fourth, fifth, exciting, beautiful, amazing space of love and expression that's accepted by others, that doesn't actually align to these toxic behaviors and monocultures of thought that we're stuck in. And, on one hand, it's about identity, but it's also about let's stop associating with these damaging behaviors that are causing climate change, that are causing these horrific criminal rates, that are causing this violence against women and children. Let's just not have that as our culture anymore. And then sort of to the personal identification aspect, the concept of sex and gender is something that's widely misunderstood. Gender and sex are different. How we choose to identify and express ourselves is up to how we feel. Me personally, I'm gender fluid. When I was a younger child, I transitioned into Sarah, and I was Sarah for a year and a bit. And my parents were like, "You do you, Sarah." And then I went back to Guy, and my whole life I've sort of just been this. Gendered hasn't been a thing to me, and it's never really mattered, and I've never run into issues until I come across people that are very set in this binary, and they think, hey, you're not doing the things that you're meant to do, so I need to bully you, or I need to be, and it's weird because I'm like, I don't know what, that's weird. Like, you're being weird. There's no reason you need to be nasty or horrible to people. Gender appears in whichever way people want it to, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. And also, it doesn't mean that if people choose to identify as a woman or as a man, there's anything wrong with that. That's totally fine. But when we start policing how other people choose to be and ways they want to live, that's when we start running into problems. Then we have the other side of that, and that's sort of the sex aspect. And sex is, we've got like man and woman, and that's the narrative and the binary that we've understood for ages, and that's that. Biologically, that's not correct. There are so many different expressions of sex. There is chromosomal sex, so you can have a diverse, different expression of how you are chromosomically, and a very few people are actually chromosomally completely male and completely female. while they're like, oh, they're not this or that, and they're not in between. And there's actually many areas along this. And then there's hormonal sex as well, how much we produce estrogen and testosterone, and how our cells and how our bodies and how our organ and how our glands are processed through these hormones. They can do that in a way that was, I guess, binary termed as male or female. But we know there are so many complex ways of chromosomal, hormonal, and physical expressions of sex. And there's actually a gigantic spectrum of sexual diversity from a biological perspective. So this sort of argument of like there's man and woman and that's what sex is actually, scientifically wrong. So now we start having to think about, okay, so what are we actually dealing with here? If we've got this whole spectrum of what sex is and this whole spectrum of what gender is, why do we have such a problem with it? Why is it so difficult? We can actually start seeing that binary is behind a lot of really damaging behavior. It's behind a lot of trauma. It's behind a lot of ways that fathers have treated their sons. It's around a lot of ways that daughters have been conditioned to treat men and to treat women from their mothers. It's this weird conditioning. And what it's manifesting as is this very gendered attitude towards nature. Social permaculture is about culture. It's about how we relate to each other. It's about how our behaviors and actions actually manifest in the world. We can have generative structures of social relating, we can have practical structures of social relating, and we can have ethical structures of cultural relating. And I think what permaculture is trying to strive for is a combination of all of those, having all of our pragmatic resource distribution in alignment with what people want and in alignment with what the planet wants. One of the most important things for us to do as permaculture practitioners, designers, whatever we want to call ourselves, is the first principle of observe, interact with social spheres. Because we have, as humans, have a really good way of getting very comfortable with how we relate to others. With this issue of climate change, with the compounding, cascades of catastrophe and crisis that we have right now, we know that we need to work together. And so we need to figure out, how do we work with people that we don't know, that we don't know how to relate to, that may not have the same views as us, and that have complete different needs to us. Why I value the queer community is because there's no linear genealogy of queer people. They just appear randomly. And there's no specific culture of queer people, and there's no specific race of queer people. Because of how queer people have to relate to each other, you just have to have this predisposed sense of sort of love and communication and safety, because you don't know what's coming. You don't know which random queer magical being is going to appear in your space, and you have to know how to respect that and deal with that. I want to bring permaculture to queer spaces because everyone knows why permaculture is incredible, but I also want to bring queer people to permaculture spaces because being able to observe and interact with queer people's ways of being, with models of justice, is actually revolutionary, and it has been in so many different spaces. The reason why I'm pushing so hard for it at the moment is because of the crisis we have. We're running out of time. We need to work together, and we need to know how to do that. It's almost as though we have this beautiful cross-pollination that's yet to happen. Social, communal, cultural skills that can be given from the queer community to permaculture, and then a lot of very, very practical resource-based support. One of the biggest issues in the queer community is access to food, good quality. I mean, that's a big issue in the whole world, access to good quality, nutrient-dense food, but also access to housing. And so, permaculture housing models of co-housing, David Holmgren's retro suburbia, and establishing flows of resources is a really, really pragmatic way that queer communities can be helped. And I do really value the trade-off between these two spaces. Initially, I believe there'll be a weird sort of cultural side-eye being like, how do we both feel comfortable in this space? And being able to have that perspective is a way that you can get further feedback from a system. That's why I'm really wanting to have queers come into permaculture to be like, oh, okay, how are different ways that we can do this? What are some ways that we can, revalue sort of waste streams and all of these points of resource contact that we have? So we're seeing this fantastic, it's not necessarily a queer space, but we've partnered with them. It's called Fungi Solutions. Awesome mycology organization that's setting up these sort of micro waste transformation systems. So it's literally transforming energy from household waste and converting that into raw materials. So these are things like soundboarding for houses, so like soundproofing walls. These are packaging. This is casings and insulation. These are like raw materials that are very, very valuable, and they're being transformed. And we're hoping that the combination of these designed systems from permaculture combining with the perspectives of queer people in queer spaces and hopefully erupting into viable solutions that not only benefit queer people, but benefit society as a whole, because it's different and better ways to do things.
What I'm hearing from that is that because queer people have had to challenge systems, they've learnt to become creative. But if we look at it that way, that they've had to be quite creative, adaptive, but still true to themselves.
Yeah.
So they've had to be quite strong. And it's that strength, creativity, and adaptation. It's a powerful asset to any community.
I certainly hope so. And there's a lot of sort of obviously barriers to get to that space, and that's kind of what we're teething out. But we also see queer spaces have a lot of access to some very efficient systems. So these are systems of dissemination of information, so around sort of social justice, around community affairs, around specifically within the justice sector. So what's happening in terms of social justice, what's happening in terms of people's rights. And you find that there's a very, very strong baseline knowledge of all of this at any given time, because that's what's important to us. People who have not necessarily had all of their rights upheld the whole way through their life, we have a lot of sympathy for people that go through that same experience. Another one is queer people are so good on social media. I don't necessarily believe that all permies are amazing on social media. Find yourself some young queer person and they will get you on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and everywhere. And these are ways that we can cross-pollinate the interests of young queer people and the resources of, young permies or older permies or people that hold resources, because right now we're needing better resource flow to solve the issues that we have. And I believe they can very well and very accurately and efficiently solve a lot of these issues. They're just not given the chance or the space.
Lovely. Thank you.
Well, I suppose I'll leave you with a couple of other binaries to chew over, because I feel like we've only just cracked into, one or two of them. But they're, obviously, as I was saying before, the punitive binary. So this is these ideas of right and wrong. There's a huge history to what right and wrong is, specifically in colonized spaces. They come from a lot of Anglo-Saxon sort of puritanical ideas of sin and of enlightenment, and they actually underpin a lot of our assumptions. There's also sort of economic binaries about rich and poor. If we look into the history of how the developed world was actually developed and what's happening in the global south and the ongoing history there, we can understand that actually those that we deem are rich are actually incredibly poor, and those that are incredibly poor are incredibly rich in culture but don't have resources. And so we need to reframe this understanding to help deal with our internalized classism. Another one is sort of racial binaries, which are assumptions that we make a lot of the time. And this binary is sort of like white colonial people and the others. And this binary is rampant everywhere, and it's quite difficult to engage with. It's a lot to unpack internally. And then another one I'd say is the ableist binary. This is the idea that everyone is able-bodied or you're disabled. And there's a lot of complexities along that whole spectrum, or within that whole space, that are really damaging and they actually perpetuate a lot of physical trauma, a lot of emotional trauma. And all of these binaries contribute to how we as a society deal with the issues that we have. So by all means, I don't expect everyone to start unpacking all of those, but, you know, even if some of them pulled a string somewhere, I'd love it if we just started to think about what these things are and where they come from and how they impact us.
Lovely. And if some people are able to unpack that, what's in it for them?
What's in it for you is better social relating. It's designing better systems, and it's being able to get more people to work with you. And the reason why we want that is because we need to work together to solve the issues that we have. From permaculture and grassroots movement, we know the change is grown from the bottom up, and we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. And I haven't seen that done any better than in permaculture spaces. So I just want to keep that going.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, April.